Chapter 1. 5 years ago, the world ended. It didn't end with fire or blood or the scream of a dying star. It ended with 6 words, spoken in a voice that was colder than the Arctic ice that ringed our territory. I, Alpha King Jaxon Thorne, reject you. The words were a physical blow, a silver-edged blade forged in the depths of a frozen hell, aimed directly at my soul. The great hall of the Northern Blood Moon Pack, a place that had always felt like home, was suddenly, utterly silent. The roaring fires in the twin hearths, big enough to roast an ox, seemed to shrink. Their warmth vanished, stolen by the glacial chill in his voice. I, Lyra Volkov, daughter of the Silverfang lineage, stood frozen. My ceremonial robes, woven from the finest silver-spun wool for the mating feast, suddenly felt like a shroud. He hadn't even looked at me, Jaxon. My Jaxon. The boy I had played hide-and-seek with in the ancient forest, the teen I had secretly adored from afar, the man whose scent, like petrichor and forged steel, the smell of a storm breaking over a mountain, had finally called to my wolf the moment he'd turned 21, just 3 days ago. 3 days. For 3 days I had lived in a dream, the fated bond, the rarest, most sacred gift from the moon goddess. Not some polite political arrangement, not a simple choice, but a divine, undeniable truth. We had known it instantly. It had happened at the midwinter feast. He, the new Alpha King, had been accepting pledges of fealty. I, a minor daughter, had stood in line with my father. And then it was my turn. I'd knelt, and when I'd looked up, his eyes had met mine. The world hadn't just snapped into focus. It had exploded. It was a jolt, a physical shock like a lightning strike to my sternum, so powerful I'd almost cried out. A shimmering, invisible cord had slammed into me, tying my soul to his. My wolf, a proud and quiet creature, had risen up and sung his name. I'd smelled him, truly smelled him for the first time. The storm, the steel, the sharp, clean scent of mate. And across the hall, I'd seen his own hand tremble. I'd seen the shock in his stormy, sea-colored eyes. He had felt it too. For 3 days, we had been glorious. We'd met in secret, twice in the old willow grove where we had played as children. The first time, he had stood 10 feet away, his body rigid. "Lyra!" he'd breathed, as if I were an apparition. "Jaxon," I'd whispered, my entire body shaking. "You feel it?" It wasn't a question. I can't breathe." He'd held out a hand, and when I'd placed my trembling fingers in his, the jolt had been so powerful it had made my knees buckle. He'd caught me, his other hand coming to my waist, and we'd just stood there, shaking, breathing each other in. His scent was everywhere. Oh, intoxicating blanket that my wolf clawed to get closer to. He'd trembled at my touch, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw as if he were blind, and I was the first thing he'd ever seen. We had spoken of a future that hummed with destiny, a future that was right. "You are my Queen Lyra," he'd whispered, his forehead pressed to mine, his voice thick with a reverence that had made me weep. "The goddess has blessed me. She has blessed our pack. He was my alpha, he was my king, he was my mate. Now he stood beside the great alpha's dais, his profile sharp and unforgiving as a newly carved flint. His gaze was fixed on the grim-faced elder council, who watched him with cold, approving eyes. Beside him, in the place of honor, stood Alpha Kalin of the Iron Ridge Pack, a wolf known for his ambition and his cruelty. And beside Kalin, his daughter, Seraphina. Her scent, a cloying, artificial sweetness like rotting flowers and poison, was an assault on my senses. She was staring at me, her red-painted lips curved in a small, triumphant smile. She was in my place, wearing the silver-spun robes I should have been wearing. "The alliance is sealed," Elder Magnus declared, his voice a gravelly finality that hammered the nails into my coffin. "Alpha King Jaxon will unite our powerful packs by taking Seraphina of Iron Ridge as his fated queen. But he is my mate. The words ripped from my throat before I could stop them. They were a raw, desperate, ugly sound in the vast, silent hall. Several wolves flinched. The elders turned to me, their faces masks of open contempt. My own father, standing near the council, closed his eyes, his face pale with a shame that cut me almost as deeply as Jaxon's betrayal. Jaxon finally turned. His eyes, the color of a stormy sea, were devoid of all warmth, all recognition, all traces of the man who had trembled at my touch just the night before. They were the eyes of a stranger, a cold, cruel king. "You are nothing," he said. The words cut deeper, infinitesimally deeper, than the initial rejection. A minor daughter of a minor line. The pack comes first. The alliance comes first. He paused, his gaze sweeping over me as if I were a piece of dirt on his boot. "Her bloodline secures our borders. Your bloodline offers nothing. Your delusion is irrelevant." Delusion. He had called it a delusion, the gift from the goddess, the song of our souls. He had stood before our people and called me a liar. The bond, our nascent, beautiful, 3-day-old bond, didn't just break. It shattered. It was not a clean break. It was a violent, tearing evisceration. I felt my ribs crack one by one. I felt my lungs collapse. I tasted blood, my own. My wolf, the strong, proud creature who had sung with joy just days before, let out a single, piercing howl. It was a sound of such profound, spiritual agony that it echoed in the souls of everyone present. I saw warriors, hardened and scarred, wince and cover their ears. I fell to my knees, my hands clawing at my chest, trying to hold myself together as my very soul split in two. The pain was absolute. It was a physical tearing of my being. The world went gray, the colors leaching out, the sounds of the hall fading to a dull roar. There was only the cold, the emptiness, and the raw, gaping wound where his soul had been tied to mine. He didn't move. He didn't flinch. He didn't even breathe hard. He just watched me break. I ran. I don't know how. My body was numb, a dead weight. But some primal instinct took over. I scrambled to my feet, my ceremonial robes tearing. I ran from the hall, from the pitying and scornful eyes of the pack, from the triumphant, poisonous scent of Seraphina. I ran from the scent of him, a scent that was now a lie, a promise of pain. I ran through the pack house, past shifters who turned their faces away, who would not meet my eyes. I ran until the cold air of the mountains hit my lungs. I didn't stop to shift. I ran until my feet were bloody. My wolf took over then, a creature of pure, mindless pain. The snap of my own bones was a welcome, grounding agony compared to the void in my chest. She ran until her paws were raw, until the frozen tundra was stained with her blood, carrying me far from the territory, far from the life that had been stolen from me. 5 years. 5 years I spent in the human world. A ghost. A shifter without a pack, a wolf without a mate, which was a thing that wasn't supposed to exist. I was an anomaly, a broken toy. For 5 years I rebuilt myself, piece by painful piece, from the ashes of the girl he had destroyed. I learned to suppress my wolf, to lock her in a cold stone cage deep inside me. I starved her of the moon, of the hunt, of life. I lived in a gray, scentless, passionless world, surrounded by humans who couldn't smell my agony. I earned degrees. I studied economics, political science, and human corporate law. I learned the language of his enemies, politics, finance, and logistics. I learned to be invisible. I learned to be hollow. I became someone else. Someone new. I forged an identity from paper and lies, a woman with no past, no family, and no scent. Now, I was back. I had learned that the Iron Ridge Alliance had crumbled 3 years ago. Seraphina, a traitor, had been exiled. And he had never called for me. He had never sent a single scout. He ruled alone, a hollow king, his reputation for ruthless, cold efficiency growing by the year. I had to know why. I had to know what had truly happened to the man who had been my destiny. I could not be free. I could not move on. I could not live until I severed the last, withered, ghostly thread of that bond. It was still there, an aching, phantom limb that hurt when the moon was full. To sever it, I had to see him one last time. I had to look into the eyes of the monster he had become and understand the monster he had made of me. But Lyra Volkov was dead. I had buried her myself in the frozen earth, 5 years ago. In her place stood Miss Evelyn Croft. Chapter 2. The office of the Alpha King was suffocating. Not with heat, but with a palpable, crushing power. It was a heavy, oppressive blanket that made the very air thick, pressing down on my lungs until I was breathing in shallow, careful sips. It was his power. His, and his alone. The unrestrained, untamed aura of an unmated Alpha King, 5 years into his reign, and it felt like a constant, low-level snarl. "Your references are intimidating, Miss Croft," said Marcus, Jackson's beta. He didn't look up from the file. He looked 10 years older than the man I remembered. The playful, laughing warrior who used to give Jackson cover for our childhood adventures was gone. This man was exhausted. Deep, bruised circles hung under his eyes, and his desk looked like a mountain range of unprocessed paperwork, a physical monument to chaos. He was drowning, and the chaos on his desk was a symptom of the rot at the pack's core. "I am thorough, Beta Marcus," I replied. My voice was calm, clipped, and utterly devoid of emotion. It was Evelyn's voice. Evelyn Croft was a fortress, and her voice was the first line of defense. It was a monotone, carefully modulated to be forgettable, lacking any of the warmth or life Lyra Volkov had once possessed. Evelyn Croft was a masterpiece of deception. Her chestnut hair, once a wild, waist-length mane that I'd been so proud of, was now severely pinned in a bun so tight it pulled at my temples. The constant, dull headache was a welcome anchor, keeping me sharp, reminding me of the pain. She wore steel-framed glasses with plain glass lenses, a barrier to hide my eyes. Her clothes were the color of ash and concrete, a high-necked blouse, a skirt that fell well below the knee. Modest, human, and designed to make her fade into the background. I was a smudge, a shadow, a ghost. And beneath those clothes, my most critical armor, strategically placed, military-grade scent-blocking patches. I'd acquired them from a human black market that catered to unique needs. They were experimental, designed to hide human pheromones, but I'd had them enhanced by a human chemist I'd paid a small fortune to. They leached a sterile, chemical odor into my skin, a constant, stinging irritation. To any shifter, I smelled of antiseptic, old paper, and something vaguely, uninterestingly human. The sterile scent was just strong enough to make a wolf's sensitive nose recoil slightly. It was the olfactory equivalent of being painfully boring. The last 3 assistants couldn't handle the pressure. Marcus sighed, finally closing the file and rubbing his temples so hard I thought he might leave a mark. They were shifter females. They were distracting, or intimidated, or both. The Alpha King is demanding. "I am not easily intimidated, sir," I said. My heart was a frantic bird against my ribs, hammering a desperate, panicked beat, but my voice was pure ice. "He's here. He's close. I can smell him." Even through the stone walls, through the scent blockers, I could feel him. A distant vibration, a magnetic pull. Mate. My wolf, the small, cold stone in my gut, stirred for the first time in years. A painful, hopeful whine. "Quiet," I commanded, crushing her ruthlessly. "He is not our mate. He is our target." Marcus gave me a long, searching look. "You're human. You understand what this is?" This is the seat of the Alpha King of all Northern Packs. It's not some human corporation in the city. There is magic here. And violence. I understand. I am adaptable. And I am discreet. My human degrees in logistics, law, and economics were my shield. My pain was my sword. Good. Goddess, he needs that. Marcus suddenly looked ancient, his gaze drifting toward the massive, closed doors of the Alpha's office. He needs stability. He needs someone who doesn't react. He let out a breath. Frankly, Miss Croft, you're the only one who applied for this posting who wasn't an unmated shifter female looking for a crown. You're the only one who doesn't want something from him. Oh, how wrong he was. I wanted everything. I wanted the truth. I wanted my past back. I wanted to see the man who had destroyed my life and force him to look me in the eye. Follow me, he said, rising. He led me down the wide, stone-flagged hall. Every step was a memory, a fresh, new hell. My feet, clad in sensible, silent-soled human shoes, crossed the threshold from the administrative wing into the Alpha's private domain. The air grew heavier, the scent of him stronger. Petrichor and forged steel. I saw the alcove where Jaxon and I had hidden from his tutors, giggling and sharing a stolen apple. I saw the tapestry I had hidden behind during my first solstice feast, just to watch him spar. The scents of pine, wood smoke, and roasting meat from the kitchens below were a constant low-level torture, reminders of a home I could never reclaim. Steady, I commanded myself. You are Evelyn. You are hollow. You are here for one reason. My mission wasn't revenge. Revenge was a hot, messy emotion, and I was cold. Mine was a quiet, desperate quest for the truth. The Iron Ridge Alliance had crumbled 3 years ago. Seraphina, it turned out, had been plotting with rogue factions from the south, funneling them weapons and information. She was exiled, her father Kalen disgraced. And Jaxon had never called for me. He had never sent a single scout. He had never undone the rejection. He ruled alone, his reputation growing more ruthless and colder by the year. I had to know why. I had to know what had truly happened to the man who had been my destiny. I had to know what had turned him into the monster who could reject his mate, before I could finally sever the last, withered, aching strand of the bond and be free. Marcus stopped before 2 massive 200-year-old oak doors, carved with the dire wolf of the Blood Moon Pack. He knocked, a brief, hesitant rap. Enter. The voice was not the one from my memories. The voice I remembered was warm, full of laughter, full of life. This voice was a low, rumbling bass, a sound that vibrated in my bones and spoke of endless exhaustion and barely leashed rage. Marcus pushed open the heavy doors. And there he was. He stood staring out the floor-to-ceiling window, his back to us. The window overlooked the valley, the heart of his territory. He was broader than I remembered, his shoulders straining the fabric of his black shirt. His black hair was longer, brushing the collar. The sheer, crushing weight of his alpha aura filled the room. It was a physical force, a gravity well that pulled all things toward him. It pressed on my chest, my skin, my skull. My wolf, dormant for 5 years, surged. It was not a whine. It was a roar. M-A-T-E. She slammed against the bars of her cage, clawing, biting, screaming. She recognized him. She wanted him. She wanted to shift, to run to him, to press her nose to his scent gland and claim. I crushed her, ruthlessly. I drove the heel of my will into that wild, hopeful sound until she fell back, silent and whimpering. The effort left me dizzy, my palms sweating. Alpha, Marcus said, his voice hesitant. This is Miss Evelyn Croft, the new candidate. Jaxon turned, slowly. My breath caught. My carefully constructed walls of ice almost shattered. The 5 years had not been kind. He was no longer the 21-year-old boy who had destroyed me. This was a man carved from granite. His face was harder, his jaw tight with a stress that seemed permanent. The small lines of laughter I remembered around his eyes were gone, replaced by the faint, silvered stress lines of a king. And his eyes, they were still the color of a stormy sea, but now they were just empty. A cold, barren ocean, haunted and deep. They held the same bottomless void I saw in my own mirror every morning. He was hollow. He raked his gaze over me. It was dismissive, brief, and cold. He sniffed the air, a faint, almost imperceptible wrinkling of his nose. He smelled the chemicals. He smelled human. Human, he stated. His voice was a flat, dead thing. Yes, Alpha, I said, my voice perfectly level. My heart was a traitor, hammering against my ribs, begging to be let out. She has the highest security clearance from the human military, and her efficiency ratings are unmatched, Marcus pressed, his voice almost pleading. She's the one I told you about. She's clean. Jaxon grunted, his gaze drifting back to the window, as if I were already forgotten. Fine. Just keep her out of my way. Her desk is in the antechamber, not here. He raised his voice slightly. And make sure she understands that failure in any capacity is not an option. The last one was weak. She understands, Alpha. Good. He didn't look at us again. Leave me. As we walked out, Marcus closing the doors softly behind us, I allowed myself one single steadying breath. He hadn't recognized me. My scent was gone, my hair was bound, my face was plain, my aura was non-existent. The girl he had rejected was gone. I was in. Chapter 3. My predecessor, a trembling beta female from a minor pack, had lasted 3 days. She had burst into tears when Jaxon had merely raised his voice. I lasted a week, then 2. By the end of the first month, I was no longer Miss Croft. I was a permanent, silent fixture. I was Evelyn. And I was, as Marcus put it in a whispered, reverent tone, a gift from the goddess. A gift he clearly didn't understand, but was terrified of losing. Jaxon's life was not a life. It was a barely controlled inferno. He was drowning in it, and his entire pack was drowning with him. The Northern Blood Moon Pack, once the most powerful and organized in the region, was fractured. The Alpha King was hollow, and the rot of his spiritual emptiness had spread. The pack was running on memory, on fear, and on the fraying threads of old loyalties. His previous assistants, all young shifter women, had been a disaster. They were intimidated by his aura, which lashed out in his rage and his grief. They fumbled, blushed, and brought their own petty pack drama into his office. Worse, they were all unmated, and they looked at him with a desperate, hopeful hunger that I could see made his skin crawl. They were wolves, and they reacted to the unmated Alpha King on a primal level. They submitted, or they postured, or they cowered. I brought only order. I was a fortress of quiet, cold efficiency. I was the antiseptic scent in the corner, the non-threatening, sexless human shadow. I was the wall between him and the chaos, and he began to lean on me before he even realized he was doing it. My mind, trained in the unforgiving logic of human law and economics, saw his kingdom not as a family, but as a fractured corporation on the verge of collapse. And I was the one pulling it back from the brink. In the first week, I rebuilt his entire scheduling system. What had been a chaotic mess of overlapping verbal promises and scraps of parchment became a color-coded, cross-referenced digital calendar. Alphas from a dozen allied territories, who had been arriving to find their appointments forgotten, were now managed with ruthless precision. In the second week, I took over the supply chain logistics for the war against the Southern Rogues. The pack was losing warriors not just to the enemy, but to incompetence. Patrols were running low on silver-tipped arrows. Their rations were spoiling, and their armor was in disrepair. I reorganized the armory, the kitchens, and the patrol rosters in 72 hours. Casualty rates dropped by 20%. By the end of the month, I was indispensable. I wasn't in the antechamber. He had, with a grunt of, "This is inefficient," ordered my desk moved into the vast, empty corner of his own office. He began to rely on me. At first, it was simple, dismissive grunts. "Evelyn, the data on the grain shipments." Then, "Evelyn, get me Marcus." Now. By the second month it was, "Evelyn, stay. I need you to take notes." I sat through tense, snarling negotiations with glowering alphas, my expression placid, my pen scratching away. They would roar, their fangs bared, their alpha power flooding the room to intimidate. It had no effect on me. I was a sterile, human void. My lack of reaction, my calm focus on the page, unnerved them. It gave Jaxon an advantage he hadn't known he was missing. He could be the roaring alpha, while I could be the cold, logical mind that recorded their concessions. I sat there, a ghost at his side, as he dictated, his voice a low, angry rumble. I learned to anticipate his needs. A specific file, a cup of coffee, black, no sugar, which I knew from our childhood, a locked door, before he even formed the thought. But this efficiency was my own personal, exquisite torture. Being this close to him was a special kind of hell I had not anticipated. Every time he moved, his scent, that intoxicating, unforgettable blend of petrichor and forged steel, would cut through the air, and my dormant wolf would pace the bars of her cage, whining, clawing at the walls of my mind. He would roll his shoulders, and I would remember how he used to do that after a long spar. He would run his hand through his hair in frustration, and I would remember the feel of that same black, silky hair under my fingers in the willow grove. He would tap his fingers on the oak of his desk, an impatient, rhythmic thump-thump. Thump. And I would remember that was the secret signal we'd used as children to tell each other to be quiet. And he felt nothing. He saw nothing. He looked at me, and his eyes, those stormy, empty oceans, passed right through me. I was a tool, a useful, efficient, sexless object. I was the coffee cup he drank from, the pen he wrote with. I was not a person. I was not Lyra. This, more than the rejection, stoked the cold embers of my anger. He hadn't just rejected me. He had erased me. One afternoon, a patrol leader, a young alpha named Rorik, was delivering a report. It was bad. They had lost 2 more shifters to an ambush by the southern rogues. Jaxon exploded. "You were complacent!" he roared, and the alpha power that slammed into the room was so potent it cracked a glass on his desk. "You followed the same path you've taken for a week. You led them to a slaughter." Rorik, a strong wolf in his own right, was on one knee, his head bowed, his body trembling with the effort of not submitting completely. "Alpha, the intel was wrong. The intel was weak." Jaxon swept a stack of reports off his desk, the parchment scattering like leaves. "And so are you. Get out of my sight. Send me a real warrior." Rorik fled, his scent a mix of terror and shame. Jaxon stood breathing heavily, his back to me, his hands clenched on his desk, his knuckles white. The room was thick with his rage. My pen had not stopped moving. Thump, thump, thump. He tapped his fingers on the desk, an old, unconscious habit. My heart stopped. My hand froze on the page. He stilled. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the scratch of my pen, which I had, with trembling fingers, resumed. He turned, slowly. He stared at me. I was sitting in my corner, my expression placid, my gaze on my notepad. I did not look up. "You are not afraid of me, Evelyn," he stated. It wasn't a question. I paused my writing. I looked up, my gaze meeting his through the plain glass lenses. "My feelings are irrelevant to my duties, Alpha. You requested a summary of Rorik's report for the War Council. He failed to provide a cohesive one. I am collating it from his testimony." He stared at me, his gaze long and probing. He was baffled. He, an Alpha King, had just unleashed a torrent of killing intent that had sent a trained warrior fleeing, and his human assistant had not even flinched. He was seeing me, Evelyn, for the first time. Not as a tool, but as an anomaly. A puzzle. "You are a very strange woman," he said, his voice low. "I am an efficient one, Alpha." He turned back to the window, but I could feel his gaze on me, in my reflection in the dark glass. I could feel the first flicker of his curiosity. It was the most dangerous thing that had happened yet. That night, I went back to my small, sterile apartment in the human-designated quarter. I locked the door, leaned against it, and let out the breath I felt I had been holding for 10 hours. My hands were shaking. I ripped the scent blockers from my skin. They came off with a tearing, painful sound, taking a layer of skin with them. The irritation was a welcome, grounding pain. My skin beneath was red, raw, and weeping. I stood under a scalding shower for an hour, scrubbing my skin until it was raw, trying to wash the idea of him off me. His scent, the look in his eyes, the memory of his finger tap. Thump, thump, thump. I got out, wrapped in a threadbare towel, and stared into the mirror. The face that stared back was pale, her eyes haunted and hollow. The tight bun had left deep red marks on my scalp. I looked nothing like the girl who had run from this place. "Lyra is dead," I reminded the woman in the mirror, my voice a harsh whisper. "He killed her." But as I watched, a single, hot, traitorous tear rolled down my cheek. The first I had shed in 5 years. Chapter 4.
The curiosity I had ignited in him became a new, subtle form of torture. His gaze would linger. I would feel it on my back as I worked, a heavy, probing weight. He would ask my opinion, not just for data, but for analysis.
"Evelyn," he'd say, his voice a low rumble across the vast office, interrupting a silence that had stretched for hours, broken only by the scratch of my pen and the rustle of his reports. "The Silverfang Pack is requesting a tithe reduction. Their harvests have failed." I wouldn't look up. "Their reports are falsified, Alpha. Their grain futures, traded through human markets, are up 120%. They are not poor. They are profiteering." A long silence. Then a low, dangerous growl. "Show me." I would rise, my sensible shoes making no sound on the stone, and present the data. He would scan it, his stormy eyes narrowing. He was seeing the pack not through the ancient lens of fealty and honor, but through the cold, human lens of data and profit. He was learning my language. This proximity was a razor's edge. I was a spy in the heart of the enemy camp, and the enemy was the man my soul was tethered to. The phantom ache of the broken bond was a constant, low-level thrum, a radio playing static just loud enough to be a torment. When he was angry, it flared, a hot, jabbing pain behind my ribs. When he was tired, it was a dull, dragging ache, an exhaustion that seeped into my own bones. He was tired. He was always tired. He was the Hollow King, and I was his hollow assistant. We were two ghosts, haunting the same hall, and neither of us knew how to leave. The new crisis broke on a Tuesday at 3 a.m. I hadn't been home. A trade caravan carrying a month's supply of silver, the only thing keeping the southern rogues from overrunning our borders, had been ambushed and destroyed. Not by rogues, but by an unknown faction. The pack was, in an instant, vulnerable. Jaxon had been awake for 48 hours, and he was a storm contained in the shape of a man. His aura was a physical, violent thing, a crushing pressure that made the candles on the wall gutter and hiss. The air was so thick with his rage it was almost unbreathable. Marcus and the other betas had come and gone, their faces pale, their scents sharp with fear. Jaxon had ripped through their reports, torn their strategies to shreds, and sent them out with roars of incompetence and "find me a solution." Now it was just us. The storm and the wall. He stood at the great map table, his back to me, his hands braced on the lacquered wood. I could see the muscles in his back and shoulders, coiled and knotted like ropes, rigid with a tension that had to be agony. He was vibrating with contained power. "They are bleeding me dry, Evelyn," he said, his voice a low, terrifying rasp. It wasn't directed at me. He was speaking to the room, to the ghosts. 5 years. 5 years I have held this pack together with my bare hands. I gave them everything. He slammed his fist on the table, not in a fit of rage, but with a crack of pure, final despair. The sound was like a gunshot. And for what? For traitors in my own council. For weakness in my borders. For this. I remained silent. My pen was poised. I was a machine. I was there to record, to organize, to fix. The Iron Ridge Alliance was a rot, he spat. I cut it out. But the poison is still in the veins. Serafina is gone, but her allies still sit on my council. They watch me. They wait for me to fail. My heart, that stupid, traitorous organ, gave a painful lurch. He was talking about the council. He was talking about the rejection. This was it. The edge of the truth I had come here to find. "They want me to take a new mate," he snarled, a sound of profound self-loathing. "They present their daughters. They want an heir. They want to tie me to them. They think a new queen will fix the hollow in the pack. Idiots." He laughed, a short, bitter, terrifying sound. "They don't understand. You can't fill a void with more." He was in pain, a deep, profound spiritual agony that resonated with my own. The broken bond ached. My wolf, who had been silent for days, let out a soft, mournful keen. She didn't want to fight him. She wanted to heal him. "He is the one who broke us," I reminded her. "My will a blade. He is the one who cut us in two." He turned, his stormy eyes landing on me. I was the only other thing in the room. The only thing that wasn't part of his world, part of his pain. I was the human, the outsider, the wall. "You," he said, his voice low. "You're not like them. You don't want anything." He walked toward me, his steps slow, deliberate. My heart was a drum against my ribs. 1, 2, 3. He was a predator, and I was a human, a small, frail thing in his den. My scent blockers stung my skin, a chemical, sterile shield. He stopped, not in front of my desk, but beside it. He was so close I could feel the heat radiating from his body. I could smell the storm, the steel, and beneath it, something else. Something I hadn't smelled since the willow grove. A faint, almost imperceptible trace of Jaxon, the man, the scent of mate. It was buried deep, deep under the rage and the hollow, but it was there. My wolf surged, a scream of pure, agonizing need. "He is a stranger," I told myself. "His name is Alpha. He is not Jaxon." "You sit there," he whispered, his voice rough with exhaustion. He leaned one hand against the wall above my desk, caging me in. I did not lean back. I sat erect, my gaze fixed on his throat, my expression perfectly, utterly blank. I roar. I break things. I have sent warriors fleeing this room for less than a snarl. And you just... right. He was too close. The chemical sting of my scent blockers was failing, overwhelmed by the sheer raw power of his. The air was thick with him. I was breathing him in. I was drowning. "What do you want, Evelyn?" he asked, his voice a soft, dangerous rumble. "Every person in this pack wants something: power, position, my name, my title, my bed. What is it that you want?" I should have given my rehearsed answer. A stable work environment, Alpha. But I was drowning. The phantom limb of the bond was on fire. His proximity was a match to a fuse, and the exhaustion, the pain, and the 5 years of suppressed rage were all coiling in my gut. He leaned closer, his eyes searching my face, seeing me. "Tell me. What could a human possibly want from a place like this?" My gaze met his. It was a mistake. His eyes, those stormy, empty oceans, were not empty. They were full. Full of pain, full of a loneliness so vast and so deep it mirrored my own. I saw the ghost of the man who had been my mate. And I felt a crack. Not in him. In me. In the fortress. In the wall. "Peace, Alpha," I whispered. The word was a betrayal. It was Lyra's word, not Evelyn's. It was soft, and it held a universe of longing that I had forbidden myself. He stilled. His gaze sharpened. He had heard the shift. The sterile, efficient machine had just shown a ghost of a soul. "Peace," he repeated, his voice barely audible. He searched my face, his eyes tracing the line of my jaw, the bridge of my nose, the severe line of my mouth. He was looking for the source of that word. He was looking for the crack. "There is no peace here, Evelyn," he whispered. His breath fanned my cheek. It was warm, and it smelled of coffee and the storm. "I am aware of that, Alpha," I said, my voice snapping back to the cold monotone. But it was too late. The crack was there. He had seen it. His gaze dropped to my mouth. It was for half a second, a fraction of a moment. But I saw it. The air in the room, already thick, became charged. It was no longer the rage of an alpha. It was the focus of a male. My wolf screamed. She knew that look. I felt the blood drain from my face. This was not part of the plan. My plan was to be a ghost, but he was seeing me, not as a tool, as a woman, a human woman. He blinked, and the moment was gone. He seemed to shake himself, a small, imperceptible tremor. He pulled back, his expression shuddering. The king returning. The cold, hollow mask slammed back into place. "This weakness," he growled, turning from me. "This ambush. It stinks of politics. It stinks of... him." "Him, Alpha?" I asked, my voice miraculously steady, even as my hands trembled under the desk. "Elder Magnus!" he spat. "He has been pushing for a new alliance with the Blackstone Pack. This ambush. It benefits him. It makes me look weak, and it makes his alliance look like a necessity." My blood ran cold. Elder Magnus. The man who had stood beside Seraphina. The man who had announced my rejection. "He is coming here," Jaxon said, his voice flat. "In 1 hour. He believes I am desperate. He believes he has me cornered. He will come with his proposal, and he will expect me to be on my knees." He turned back to me. The brief moment of connection was gone. He was the king again. The strategist. "You," he commanded. "You will be here. You will not write. You will watch. You will watch him. You will watch his betas. You will watch everything. You see things that I miss. I want to know what you see." He had just promoted me, from assistant to spy. I was no longer a shadow. I was a player. and I was about to be in a room with the man who had orchestrated my ruin. "Yes, Alpha," I said, my voice a perfect, cold whisper. Chapter 5. An hour can be an eternity. By the time the heavy oak doors opened again at 4 in the morning, the tension in the office had crystallized. It was no longer the hot, chaotic rage of Jackson's despair. It was the cold, lethal calm of a king preparing for battle. He sat behind his massive desk, not lounging, but perched on the edge of his chair, a predator waiting for the trap to be sprung. I was in my corner, a fresh notepad in front of me, my pen poised. My heart hammered a slow, heavy, painful beat against my ribs, a drumbeat of dread. He is coming. The man who announced my doom. The man who smiled. The doors opened without a knock. Elder Magnus did not believe in such niceties. He was exactly as I remembered, and 1,000 times worse. He was a creature of dry, brittle age, his tall frame stooped, his gray hair thin and plastered to his scalp. He wore the heavy formal robes of the Elder Council, and he walked with a carved oak staff that clicked ominously on the stone floor. His scent hit me first, a wave of nauseating, complex odors. It was the scent of dry parchment, of dust, of an old unlit fireplace. But beneath it, there was something else. Something cloyingly sweet and rotten, like flowers wilting in stagnant water. It was the smell of old, curdled malice. My wolf, the creature I had starved and beaten into submission, rose. She didn't just pace. She let out a visceral, silent snarl of pure, unadulterated hatred. This was the man who had stood beside Seraphina. This was the man whose voice had been the hammer that shattered my life. His words of rejection striking with a cold, political satisfaction. The broken bond, the phantom limb that connected me to Jaxon, flared with a white-hot agony. It was not a dull ache. It was a fresh, tearing wound. My own body was screaming at me that this man was wrong, that he was a lie. I forced my hand to remain steady. I did not look up. I was Evelyn. A machine. A void. "Alpha King," Magnus said, his voice a dry, reedy rasp. He made a shallow, dismissive bow, a mockery of respect. "A tragedy. A true tragedy. The loss of the silver shipment. It leaves us all so very vulnerable." His 2 betas fanned out behind him, their expressions carefully neutral. They were large, brutal-looking shifters, their scent a simple, clean smell of pine and leather. They were soldiers. But they were his. "Your concern is noted, Elder." Jackson's voice was a low, dangerous rumble. All the exhaustion was gone, replaced by a cold, deadly calm. "You requested this meeting at an ungodly hour. I assume it was not merely to offer condolences." Magnus smiled, a thin, dry stretching of his lips. It was the same smile from my nightmares. "Ever to the point, my king. I come as a friend, as a loyal servant of this pack, which my family has served for 5 generations." He moved to the center of the room, his presence sucking the very warmth from the air. "You are in a precarious position. The southern rogues will hear of this vulnerability within days. They will press their advantage. Your patrols are already stretched thin. Without this silver, you cannot fund the armory. You cannot pay the tithes to our human suppliers. You seem to have a very thorough grasp of my logistical failures, Magnus." Jaxon interred, his voice silk over steel. Magnus's smile didn't waver. "I make it my business to know the health of the pack." He let the implication hang in the air. "You failed. I am watching." "And you come with a solution, I presume?" Jaxon steepled his fingers, leaning forward. He was playing the part of the cornered king, and he was playing it perfectly. "I do," Magnus said. He sounded triumphant, the smug satisfaction rolling off him in waves. The Blackstone Pack. My pen froze for a nanosecond. The Blackstone Pack. A ruthless, ambitious pack from the far mountains. They were known for two things: their vast, seemingly endless silver mines and their brutal, calculating alpha, Lord Valerius. Lord Valerius controls nearly half the silver in the Northern Territories, Magnus continued, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial tone. He is ambitious. He sees your struggle, and he wishes to help. Help, Jaxon repeated. The word was flat, devoid of meaning. An alliance. A permanent, binding alliance. He has resources. That would solve your silver problem overnight. He asks only for what is fair in return. And what? Jaxon asked. Does he consider fair? Here it was. The true purpose of this meeting. The reason my life had been destroyed. It had always been about this. Power, politics, alliances. I had just been a pawn to be sacrificed. A union, Alpha King, Magnus said, his voice oily. Lord Valerius has a daughter. The Lady Alara, a strong, pure-blooded shifter from an ancient line, a suitable queen. The room went utterly still. The phantom bond connecting me to Jaxon didn't just ache. It snapped taut, a live wire of pure, unadulterated revulsion. It was not my revulsion, it was his. The very idea was a violation to him, a physical sickness. I felt the bile rise in his own throat, a wave of nausea so profound it made my own stomach clench. He hates this, I realized. He is not hollow. He is in agony. A new mate, Jaxon said, his voice dangerously soft. To fill the hollow in the pack, as you once so poetically put it, Elder. It would stabilize your reign, Magnus pressed, his eyes gleaming. He mistook Jackson's quiet for consideration. He mistook the lethal calm for desperation. It would bond the packs. It would secure your borders. It would give the pack a future, an heir. This was the trap. This was the checkmate. He had taken Jackson's army, the silver, and now he was offering him a new one, at the price of his name, his bed, his bloodline, and it was all built on a lie. The lie that Jaxon was free to take a new mate. The lie that his first one was truly gone. I did as I was told. I watched. And as the two alphas stared each other down, a battle of wills in the suffocating silence, I saw it. Magnus was smug, his scent of rotten flowers spiking with triumph, but his beta to the left, a younger man with nervous eyes, wasn't looking at Jaxon. He was looking at Magnus, and he was terrified. As Magnus spoke of the union, the beta's hand twitched toward the hilt of his knife. Not a threat. A nervous tick. A gesture of fear. And then I saw his cuff. On the sleeve of his black tunic, embroidered in a dull gray thread, was a sigil. It was small, barely visible. A serpent coiled around a broken fang. My blood turned to ice. It was not a northern sigil. It was not from Blackstone. It was the mark of the Southern Rogue Shadow Pack. The very ones Jaxon was at war with. The ambush. The unknown faction. My God, Magnus hadn't just benefited from the attack. He had orchestrated it. This was not a proposal. It was the final move in a coup, delivered by a traitor who was in league with the enemy. Jaxon, lost in his own revulsion, hadn't seen it. He was too busy fighting the battle in front of him to see the knife at his back.
Magnus was still speaking. A most generous offer. Lord Valerius is prepared to send the first shipment of silver as a dowry, as soon as the betrothal is announced.
Jackson's control was magnificent. He let the silence stretch, let Magnus believe he had won. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured. You have given me much to consider, Elder Magnus. An alliance of this magnitude cannot be decided in a moment of desperation. Magnus's thin lips tightened. He had wanted an immediate capitulation. "Leave the proposal with me," Jaxon continued. "I will give you my answer by the solstice." He had deflected. He had bought himself time. Magnus knew he had been dismissed. He gave another shallow bow. "As you wish, Alpha King. But do not consider for too long. The wolves are at the door, and they are hungry." It was a clear, undisguised threat. He turned to leave, his staff clicking on the stone. His betas followed. As they passed my desk, Magnus paused. He hadn't so much as glanced at me the entire meeting. I was furniture, a human appliance. Now he stopped, his head tilting. He sniffed the air, his nose wrinkling, just as Jaxon's had on my first day. "Ah, the assistant." His eyes, cold and reptilian, fell on me. "You are still here. You are resilient. For a human." My heart stopped. My blood was ice. I did not move. I did not breathe. I was Evelyn. I was a void. He stared at me, his gaze probing, searching. He was looking for a reaction, for the fear he was due. He saw only the placid, blank face of a human secretary, her gaze fixed on her notepad. "Alpha King," he said, his voice laced with a new, subtle mockery. "A human. How sterile. You should be careful, Jaxon. Such pets can be fragile." He turned and left, the doors closing behind him with a soft, final thud. The silence he left behind was a ringing, deafening thing. Jaxon did not move for a full minute. He stared at the closed doors, his body rigid. The phantom bond was a screaming, frantic thing, a whirlwind of rage and betrayal, and a bone-deep violation. I forced my hand to be steady. I made a final note on my pad. My own rage was a cold, sharp, beautiful thing. It made me strong. It made me clear. "Evelyn?" His voice was a rasp. He was still staring at the door. "Yes, Alpha. Report." I stood. My voice, when it came, was the coldest, most precise instrument I had ever wielded. "He is not your ally, Alpha. He is your enemy. He is a traitor." Jaxon turned, his face a mask of stone. "Explain." "He did not come here to negotiate. He came here to confirm his victory. His scent spiked with satisfaction when he mentioned your vulnerability, not sympathy. He was pleased by the ambush." I stepped forward, into the center of the room. "But he is not working with the Blackstone Pack. He is working with the Southern Rogues." Jaxon's stormy eyes narrowed to slits. "How do you know this?" "His beta, the one on the left, his tunic cuff, it bore a sigil. I described it. A serpent coiled around a broken fang." Jaxon's blood drained from his face. He was at my side in an instant, his hands gripping my shoulders. His grip was steel, painful, his aura lashing out. "Are you certain?" "Yes," I said, not flinching from his grip, from his power. "I am trained in sigil recognition from my human work. It is the mark of the Umbra Fang Pack, the shadow pack led by the rogue Alpha, Malachor." Jaxon released me, stumbling back as if I had physically struck him. "Malachor," he whispered. "He's been working with Malachor." All this time, the raids, the ambushes, the silver. He understood. Magnus hadn't just allowed the ambush. He had arranged it, funneling information to the very enemy Jaxon was trying to fight, all to make him weak enough to be forced into an alliance that would benefit them both. Magnus would get a piece of the Blackstone silver, and Malachor would get a weakened, fractured Northern Kingdom. Jaxon stared at me, and for the first time, the hollowness in his eyes was gone. It was replaced by a blazing, terrifying, predatory fire. He was no longer the Hollow King. He was the Alpha. "He thinks he has me in a cage," Jaxon whispered, a terrible, slow smile spreading across his face. "He thinks he's the wolf, and I'm the bait." He looked at me, his gaze sharp enough to cut. "You did well, Evelyn. You saw what my own betas, my own warriors, missed. You saw the truth." He strode back to his desk, no longer exhausted, but filled with a sudden, violent energy. "You will not be leaving," he commanded. "The solstice is in 2 weeks. He's given us a deadline." He looked up at me, his eyes blazing with a light I hadn't seen in 5 years. "He's given us a weapon." Chapter 6. The 2 weeks that followed were a blur of adrenaline, secrecy, and an agonizing, suffocating proximity. The truce of exhaustion that had existed between Jaxon and me was shattered, replaced by the electric, humming tension of a shared hunt. The Hollow King was gone. In his place was the Alpha King, and he was a terrifying, magnificent thing to behold. He didn't sleep. I don't think he ate. He moved with a restless, lethal energy, and his office, my office, became the war room. The great map table was no longer a showpiece. It was a battlefield, covered in patrol routes, sigil-marked territories, and lines of connection that I had drawn, linking Magnus to the southern rogues. "He used the old trade routes," Jaxon growled on the third night. We were the only 2 people in the entire packhouse who were awake. The room was lit by a single candelabra, casting long, dancing shadows. He was leaning over the map, his white shirt undone at the collar, his sleeves rolled up, revealing the corded muscle of his forearms. The ones my father declared obsolete. He's been moving silver out and weapons in, right under our noses. His rage was no longer the hot, chaotic despair I had witnessed before. It was a cold, pure, focused thing. A weapon he was sharpening. And that weapon was now aimed, with my help, directly at Magnus. My role had fundamentally changed. I was no longer just the wall. I was the architect of the counteroffensive. Jaxon had his warriors, led by a tight-lipped, grim-faced Marcus, running silent patrols, gathering physical evidence of Magnus's movements. They were the muscle. I was the mind. "He's not just using the old routes, Alpha," I said, my voice quiet in the stillness. I pointed to a complex ledger I had pulled from the Pack's financial archives. "He's using your name." Jaxon looked up, his stormy eyes burning with a cold fire. "He's been funding Malicor's war against you with your own treasury," I explained, my finger tracing a line of outgoing payments. Small amounts, disguised as infrastructure repairs and human tithes. But they all lead to the same offshore human-run accounts. The ones you've seen, the ones my human contacts were able to trace. My contacts were me, at 3 a.m., using a firewalled satellite link to break into international banking systems. A skill I had not learned in law school. A skill I had learned from the human intelligence agency that had trained me after I'd fled. Jaxon stared at the data, his jaw clenching so hard I heard the muscle pop. He is bleeding me with one hand and offering me a tourniquet with the other. The arrogance. "He doesn't see you as a threat," I said simply. "He sees you as a broken, grieving king, desperate for a solution. He sees this—" I tapped the Blackstone proposal. "As his checkmate." "And he sees you," Jaxon said, his voice dropping, "as a pet." His gaze met mine across the table. The candle flame flickered in his dark, intense eyes. "That is our greatest advantage." He was right. In the days that followed, Magnus and his faction made no secret of their movements. They assumed they were in control. Magnus would pass me in the halls, his scent of rotten flowers making my wolf snarl. He would offer me that thin, dry smile, a predator patting the head of a harmless animal, moments before he devoured its master. He had no idea the pet was cataloging his every move. He didn't know that the fragile human was cross-referencing his secret meetings with Malicor's supply raids, proving a one-to-one correlation. He didn't know that I was the one who had decoded their encrypted messages, using a simple human cipher he would have considered beneath his notice. But this new shared purpose was a torment. We were never apart. He had meals brought to the office, and we ate in silence. Two generals bent over a map. He had a cot brought into an adjoining antechamber for himself, and he insisted I use the small divan in the office for the few hours of rest we allowed ourselves. To be in the same room as him, breathing the same air, working toward the same goal, it was blurring the line between Lyra and Evelyn. Jaxon, in his focused, predatory state, was Jaxon, the man I had grown up with, the man who had been my first and only, well, everything. He was sharp, brilliant, and possessed of a strategic mind that, when not clouded by grief, was breathtaking. I found myself admiring him. I found myself falling for the man he was, all over again, even as I was supposed to be the ghost of the woman he had killed. The phantom bond, the thing that had been a source of constant, low-level pain, was changing. It no longer just ached with loss. When we worked together, when our minds synced on a single problem, it hummed. It was a low, resonant thrum of rightness, of completion. He felt it too. I knew he did. He wouldn't just look at me as an asset. His gaze would soften. He would find excuses to be near me. He'd come to stand behind my chair, ostensibly to look at the ledger on my desk, and his hand would rest on the back of my chair. The heat of his body would be a brand against my back, and I would have to lock my muscles to keep from trembling. "You are relentless, Evelyn," he murmured one night, his voice thick with exhaustion, and something else. Gratitude. I have not had an ally like you in ever. He was standing over me, his scent of petrichor and steel filling my lungs. The scent blockers were a joke. They were a paper shield against a tidal wave. I was breathing him in, and my wolf was purring. "I am merely efficient, Alpha," I said, my voice a strained whisper. "No," he said, his voice rough. He moved, and his hand, big and calloused, settled on my shoulder. It was fire. A jolt of pure, unadulterated agony and ecstasy shot through me, straight from his hand to the core of my soul. The bond screamed. It was a live wire, and he had just grabbed it. I flinched, a violent, uncontrollable jerk, my pen scattering across the desk. He recoiled instantly, as if he'd been burned. "Evelyn?" I couldn't breathe. My heart was trying to escape my chest. Pain. It was all pain. The touch of my fated mate, who did not know me, who was touching me as a stranger. It was a violation of the bond, a rejection all over again, amplified 1,000 times. Tears, hot and sudden, sprang to my eyes. A betrayal. Evelyn never cried. I apologize, Alpha," I gasped, dropping my head, my hair falling forward to hide my face. I fumbled for my pen, my hands shaking so badly I couldn't grasp it. A muscle spasm. I am tired." I could feel him staring at me. I could feel his confusion, his concern. He had meant it as a gesture of comfort, of alliance. He had no way of knowing he had just laid a hot coal on my bare soul. "Evel, you are trembling," he said, his voice low and tight with a new, strange emotion. He knelt beside my chair. It was the most shocking thing he could have done. An Alpha King, kneeling. "Evelyn, look at me." I couldn't. I shook my head, my hair a curtain. "Please, Alpha." "I am fine, just overtired." His hand, the one that had burned me, came up, but he didn't touch me. He hovered, his fingers inches from my face, his own hand trembling slightly. "You said You said you wanted peace, he whispered, his voice a raw, broken thing. And I have brought you into my war. I have made you my weapon, and you're human. Magnus was right. You are fragile. Fragile. The word was a slap. I was not fragile. I was a wolf. I was a warrior. I was his mate. The injustice of it, the bitter, bitter irony, gave me a surge of strength. I lifted my head. My eyes were still wet, but my gaze was fierce. I locked his, and I let him see the cold, hard fury in my soul, mistaking it for human resilience. I am not fragile, Alpha, I said, my voice shaking but full of steel. I am focused, and we have work to do. His gaze locked on mine. He was kneeling beside me, his face level with mine. He was seeing the tears. He was seeing the fire. He was seeing the anomaly, the puzzle of the human woman who wept and spat fire in the same breath. His eyes, those stormy, beautiful, broken oceans, searched mine. And once again, his gaze dropped to my mouth. This time it was not for a second. This time it was a long, deliberate, agonizing appraisal. He was kneeling at my feet. The king. And he was looking at his human assistant as if she were the only source of water in a burning desert. The bond wasn't just humming, it was singing. It was a siren song, pulling us both onto the rocks. He wanted to kiss me. He, Jaxon, wanted to kiss Evelyn, and I, Lyra, wanted him to. More than I wanted my next breath. More than I wanted revenge. Jaxon, I breathed. It was a whisper. A mistake. The wrong name. Lyra's name for him. He flinched, his eyes widening, the spell breaking. What did you call me? My blood turned to ice. I had slipped. After 5 years of perfect control, the mask had not just cracked, it had fallen. I said Alpha Jaxon, I stammered, my heart seizing, pulling back. I am not well. I should retire. I stood, a jerky, puppet-like motion, my chair scraping loudly on the stone. Jaxon rose slowly, his expression a mask of profound, bewildered confusion. He stared at me, his head tilted. "All me that again?" he said, his voice a low, dangerous command. "Alpha," I whispered, my terror genuine. "What you just called me, say it." "Alpha Jaxon." "No," he said, his eyes narrowing, searching my face. "Before that, you said—" He looked lost, as if he'd heard a song from a dream and was trying to place the melody. It sounded. He shook his head, the moment passing. "You're right. You're exhausted. We both are." He ran a hand through his hair, his own confusion warring with the exhaustion. "Go. Get some rest. We have a war to plan." I fled. I didn't walk. I fled to my small apartment, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm of danger, danger, danger. I had made a mistake, a fatal, terrible mistake. He hadn't just seen a crack. He had heard a ghost. And now, the Alpha King, the hunter, had a new mystery to solve, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, he would not rest until he had the answer. Chapter 7. My flight to the apartment was a blur of panic. I slammed the door, my steel-plated deadbolt clicking shut with a sound like a guillotine. My back hit the cheap wood, and I slid down it, my legs giving out. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely uncap the vial. More. I needed more. I ripped open the collar of my sterile white blouse and tore the scent blocker patch from my skin. It came away with a pained rip, taking a layer of skin with it. The chemical burn was a constant, itchy pain, but it was nothing compared to the terror of being seen. The apartment, my human apartment, was a lie. It was as sterile and void as my persona. No pictures, no books, Save for technical manuals, no color. It was a waiting room, a prison cell I had built for myself. I scrubbed my skin raw in the shower, the hot water stinging the chemical burns, but I couldn't wash him off me. His scent, that overwhelming, intoxicating scent of petrichor and steel, was in my hair, on my skin, in my lungs. The phantom bond was a screaming, raw nerve. He had knelt. He had looked at me with longing. He, Jaxon, had wanted Evelyn, and I, Lyra, had called his name. Fool! My wolf, who had been purring in his proximity, now snapped at me, a vicious, terrified thing. You have undone us. You have shown him the ghost. He was a hunter. He had heard a whisper in a silent room. He would not stop until he found the source. He would tear Evelyn Thorne apart, and he would find me, Lyra, the creature he had hated enough to exile. The creature his council had deemed a political liability? What would he do when he found me? When he realized the human pet he was beginning to trust, the fragile woman he was starting to want, was the fated mate he had publicly and brutally cast aside. The revulsion would be absolute, the humiliation for him unbearable. He had rejected his true mate for a political alliance, and now that mate had returned as a human spy. He would not see it as a desperate act of survival. He would see it as the ultimate betrayal. He would destroy me. Not with a rejection. This time, with his bare hands. I had to be colder. I had to be more perfect. The wall had to be rebuilt, not of brick, but of ice. I returned to the pack house the next morning, my hair pulled back so tightly it made my temples ache. My suit was a size larger, deliberately ill-fitting, hiding what little curves I had. I had applied 3 layers of the scent blocker, the chemical sting so sharp it made my eyes water. I was no longer Evelyn, the quiet assistant. I was Evelyn, the Arctic void. When I entered the office, he was there. He hadn't slept. He was standing at the window, staring out at the dawn, but he wasn't seeing it. He was seeing last night. I knew it. Alpha, I said. My voice was flat, devoid of all inflection, colder than I had ever made it. He turned slowly. His eyes, stormy and shadowed, raked over me. He was looking for the woman who had cried, the woman who had whispered his name. He saw only the machine. His disappointment was a physical, palpable thing. The bond ached with it. It was a cold, sharp, metallic taste in the back of my throat. He had been hoping something, and I had just killed that hope. Evelyn, he said, his voice flat, matching mine. The brief, tentative warmth of the last 2 weeks was gone. We were back to being king and servant, strangers. You are early, he said. There is work to be done, I replied, moving to my desk. I did not meet his eyes. I sat. I pulled out my ledger. Marcus's patrols are due to report in. I have cross-referenced the treasury logs from the last quarter. The discrepancies are not just in the infrastructure accounts. They are in the agricultural tithes as well. Magnus has been stealing from the pack's food stores. I was all business. I was the wall. I could feel him watching me. He did not move from the window for a full 10 minutes. He just watched me. It was a new kind of scrutiny. No longer curious. No longer warm. It was suspicious. Calculating. He was the hunter. And I was the anomaly he could not explain. Marcus, he finally said, his voice a low growl. His beta entered so silently I didn't even hear the door. Alpha. I want a deep background check on Miss Thorne, Jaxon commanded, his gaze still locked on me. I want to know where she was born. I want to know who her parents were. I want to know what she ate for breakfast 5 years and 1 day ago. I want everything. My blood ran cold, but I did not look up. My pen continued to move, a steady, calm scratching on the parchment. He will find nothing. My human identity was a fortress, built by the best. Alpha, Marcus said, his voice hesitant. We already did a background check. When she was hired, she's clean. Law degree, high-level clearances. Do it again, Jaxon snarled. Do it deeper. I want to know who she is. Marcus, his face a mask of confusion, nodded. Yes, Alpha. He glanced at me, his eyes full of a new, wary suspicion. He had been my ally. Now Jaxon had just made me a target. The next 2 days were a new, exquisite form of hell. The office was a silent battlefield. Jaxon worked with a cold, brutal efficiency. But the alliance, the thrum between us, was gone. It was replaced by a chasm of suspicion. He would speak to me only in commands. Report, analyze, file. And he would watch me. He was waiting for me to slip again. He was also, I realized, actively trying to scent me. He would find reasons to stand closer, to hand me a document instead of placing it on the desk. He would lean in, his head tilted, and inhale, his frustration mounting when all he got was the sterile chemical sting of my blockers. He was going mad. I could feel it through the bond. He was haunted by a ghost, and he was starting to think that ghost was me. On the third morning, the day before the solstice, Marcus returned. Jaxon and I were, as always, bent over the map, the air between us a heavy, charged thing. Alpha, Marcus said, his voice low. He placed a thin file on Jackson's desk. It's, as I said, she's clean, but you were right. It's too clean. Jackson's head snapped up. Evelyn Thorne was born 29 years ago in a human metropolis, Marcus read, his voice tight. Parents died in a car crash, top of her class, law school, internships, flawless resume. But it's a ghost's life, Alpha. There are no people, no old friends, no social media, no jilted lovers. Her identity, it didn't just exist. It appeared 5 years ago, fully formed, before that. Marcus shrugged. It's like she didn't exist at all. Jackson's stormy gaze fell on me. I was still. I was a statue. A ghost, Jaxon whispered. He was not speaking to Marcus. He was speaking to me. He walked toward my desk, his steps slow, deliberate. The hunter had cornered his prey. 5 years, he said, his voice a soft, dangerous rumble. He stopped in front of me, placing his hands on my desk, leaning in. You appeared 5 years ago. The exact same month my mate disappeared. My heart, that traitor, it stopped. What a coincidence? Evelyn, he whispered. I raised my head. My face was a perfect, placid mask. I do not believe in coincidences, Alpha. I believe in data. Your beta has provided you with my data. I am Evelyn Thorne. I am a human. I am your assistant. He stared at me, his eyes searching, pleading for something. For a crack. For a flicker of the ghost. He was so close to the truth. You called me Jaxon, he breathed, his voice raw. A mistake, Alpha, I said, my voice like ice. I overheard an older servant use the name. It was a moment of exhaustion, a slip of the tongue. It will not happen again. It was a lie, a perfect, plausible, cold lie, and it broke something in his eyes. He had been hoping, begging for a miracle, and I had just given him a stone. He stared at me for a long, agonizing moment. The man in him, the one who had knelt, disappeared. The king, the hollow, broken king, returned. I see, he said, his voice empty. He straightened up, the light in his eyes dying. Then you are dismissed, Miss Thorne. We are done. He was letting me go. He was rejecting Evelyn. The pain of it was so sharp, so unexpected, it took my breath away. But before I could even process the words, before I could stand, the office doors slammed open, crashing against the stone walls. It wasn't a knock. It wasn't an entrance. It was an invasion. Marcus spun, his hand on his blade. Elder Magnus stood in the doorway, his face a mask of pure, triumphant malice. Behind him were not just his 2 betas, but 10 pack warriors, their armor gleaming, their hands on their weapons. "Jaxon!" he spat, the name an insult. "Your time for consideration is over." Jaxon didn't even turn. He remained facing me, his back to the elder. "You are not welcome here, Magnus." "I am always welcome," Magnus snarled, stepping into the room. "I am the council, and I am here to inform you that your private war is over. I have just, publicly, announced the Blackstone betrothal to the entire pack, a gesture of strength in your moment of weakness." He smiled, that dry reptilian smile. "The pack is overjoyed. They crave stability. They crave a queen. Lord Valerius and his daughter, the Lady Alara, will be arriving at sundown for the solstice betrothal." He had done it. He had forced the hand. He had publicly cornered the king. To refuse now would be to declare war, not just on Blackstone but on his own pack, who Magnus had just convinced were being saved. Jaxon turned, his face a slow, terrible mask of calm. "You have forced my hand, Elder." "I have saved this pack," Magnus corrected, his voice rising. "And now you will accept the alliance. You will greet your new bride, or ... quote. He gestured to the warriors behind him. "You will be removed as Alpha for failing to protect your people. The choice is yours, King. It was a coup, here and now." Jackson's gaze was flat. He looked at Magnus. He looked at the warriors. And then his gaze, heavy and final, landed on me. On the human pet, on the ghost, on the anomaly. I was his only ally, and we had just been checkmated. Chapter 8. The air in the office was a held breath, a drawn blade. 10 pack warriors, loyal to the council, stood behind an elder who had just declared a coup. Marcus was one man, his hand on his sword, his back to his Alpha. And Jaxon. Jaxon was staring at me. His gaze was hollow, final. He had just dismissed me. He had just rejected Evelyn. He had faced his last, desperate hope, that the ghost in his head was real, and I had met him with a wall of ice. He was alone. Utterly. Checkmate. I watched, my own heart a cold, dead stone in my chest, as the Alpha King's posture shifted. The tension did not leave him, but the despair did. A new, terrible calm settled over him, a stillness that was far more dangerous than his rage. He turned slowly, his back to me, to face his executioner. "You have saved the pack, Elder Magnus," Jaxon said. His voice was not the snarl of a cornered wolf. It was a soft, clear, resonant sound, a king's voice. "Your concern for our people is commendable." The room went silent. I could feel Marcus's shock, a sharp spike of adrenaline and betrayal. Magnus's triumphant, rotten flower scent faltered, replaced by a momentary confusion. He had come prepared for a bloody fight, for a defiant, broken king. He was not prepared for capitulation. "Then, you accept?" Magnus asked, his voice suddenly reedy, uncertain. Jaxon smiled. It was the most terrible smile I had ever seen. It was the smile of the Hollow King, a mask of polished, empty courtesy. "Of course. The pack comes first. Always." He strode past the warriors, who shifted uneasily, their hands still on their weapons. He did not look at them. He was their king, and he moved with an authority they had forgotten he possessed. "You have announced the betrothal," Jaxon said, stopping directly in front of Magnus. The elder was tall, but Jaxon was taller. He was the alpha. And in this moment, everyone felt it. Then we must not keep our guests waiting. Lord Valerius and his daughter will be arriving at sundown. He placed a hand on Magnus's shoulder, a gesture of alliance, a king's trap. The elder flinched at the contact. You will prepare the great hall, Jaxon commanded, his voice soft. A feast, our finest. The pack must see the strength of this union. Of course, Alpha, Magnus stammered, his victory suddenly feeling wrong. He had won too easily. And I, Jaxon said, turning away, will prepare myself. The warriors, Magnus gestured to his armed guard. Will remain with you, Elder, Jaxon said. You are the master of this ceremony. You must be protected. He looked over his shoulder, his stormy eyes flat and dead. We would not want any accidents to spoil the celebration. Magnus's thin lips pressed together. He had been outmaneuvered. His show of force had been accepted, then turned back on him as a duty. He had no choice but to accept. As you command, Alpha King, he said, his voice a low hiss. He turned, his robes swirling. Warriors, with me. We have a wedding to prepare. He swept from the room, his 10 guards following, their armored boots echoing on the stone. The coup was complete. The victory was his. The heavy doors clicked shut, leaving Jaxon, Marcus, and me in the sudden ringing silence. Marcus turned to his Alpha, his face a mask of white-hot disbelief and fury. Alpha, you yielded. You are handing the pack to that traitor. Be silent, Jaxon snarled. His mask of calm did not shatter. It evaporated. He was a creature of pure, lethal, focused rage. He strode to his desk, his every movement vibrating with power. He thinks he has won. He thinks he is a wolf. He is a snake. And snakes are predictable. He rounded on his beta. Marcus, every warrior loyal to me, not the council, not my name, but to me. I want them in the great hall tonight, not in armor, in servant's livery. Every barmaid, every steward, every cook, armed, daggers, short swords, garrots, nothing visible. Marcus's eyes widened, his confusion clearing, replaced by a dawning, terrible understanding. Alpha, what do you... He is a traitor. Jaxon's voice was a low, cutting growl. He's in league with Malachor. The ambush on the silver was him. He bled us only to offer a cure that would make him rich and powerful. How? Jaxon pointed at me. His finger was a blade. She saw it. His men. They wear the Umbra Fang sigil. Magnus is not planning a betrothal. He is planning an execution. The blood drained from Marcus's face. My God. Malachor's men will be in that hall tonight, Jaxon continued, his voice a low, rapid torrent. Assassins mixed with Blackstone's guard. The moment I am bound by oath to Alara, they will strike. They will kill me. They will kill Lord Valerius. They will kill his daughter. Magnus will heroically kill the assassins, blaming Malachor's entire rogue pack, who he found too late. He will seize control of both packs, ours and Blackstone's, in the ensuing chaos, hailed as a hero. A savior. It was a brilliant, bloody, perfect plan. Marcus was already moving to the door. I will gather the loyalists. We will not let them into the hall. We will strike first. No! Jaxon roared. You will do nothing. You will let them in. You will let them all in. The traitors, the assassins, the snakes. I want every one of them in that hall. I want them to feel safe. I want them to draw their blades. He smiled, that terrible, cold smile returning. A wedding is a celebration. And a celebration is the perfect cover for a slaughter. Marcus met his Alpha's gaze. He saw the king he had been missing for 5 years. He bowed, low and deep. It will be as you say, Alpha. He left. The door clicked shut, and I was alone with him. The silence that fell was heavier, more dangerous than the one that had come before. The air was thick, humming with his rage, his power, and the unresolved, agonizing thing between us. I should have left. He had dismissed me. My work was done. I could walk out that door and no one would stop me. I could take my revenge by doing nothing, by letting him walk into the slaughter he was planning, a slaughter that could just as easily turn on him. My wolf, the creature I hated, screamed at the thought. She clawed at the inside of my soul, a desperate, frantic, protective rage. He will die! Our mate will die! I stood. My legs were shaking. You have a plan, I said, my voice hoarse. He turned to me. The king was gone. The hunter was back. His eyes were dark, burning with a cold, suspicious fire. We are done. I dismissed you, Miss Thorne. Your plan is flawed, I said, ignoring him, my own mind racing. You are assuming Magnus's men are the only threat. You are assuming Malicor's assassins will be obvious. You are wrong. And you know this. How? He sneered. More data? I know it because I was trained by the same people who train them. I snapped, the ice in my voice cracking. Human intelligence. Malicor's best are not shifters. They are humans. They have no scent. They will be dressed as servants, just like your men. You are walking into a bloodbath and you won't even know who to kill. He strode toward me, his rage and suspicion a physical wave. You, Evelyn Thorne, the ghost, the woman who appeared 5 years ago. He stopped, inches from me, his power a crushing physical weight. The woman who called me Jaxon. My heart hammered. Lie, the wall. You're obsessed, I whispered, forcing a cold, clinical tone. You are letting your grief for your lost mate cloud your judgment, Alpha. I am a human. I am your assistant. And I am telling you, your plan will get you killed. Stop lying, he roared, and his hand, fast as a snake, shot out. He didn't grab my arm. He grabbed the high, tight collar of my blouse, and he ripped. The sound of tearing fabric was like a gunshot in the silent room. Buttons scattered, pinging on the stone floor. I cried out, stumbling back, but he held fast, his other hand grabbing my shoulder, pulling me close. The top of my blouse was gone, ripped open to the shoulder, and beneath it, bare to the air, was the inflamed, raw, red patch of my scent blocker. He froze. His stormy eyes, wide with confusion, stared at the medical-grade adhesive on my skin. What in the hell? He didn't understand. He was a wolf. He saw a patch, not a prison. He saw a bandage, not a mask. But before he could process it, before his mind could make the leap, thwack. It was a sound of air parting, a sound of a projectile. It came from the high, narrow window behind him, the one he had been staring out of at dawn. I didn't think. I didn't plan. Evelyn Thorne ceased to exist. The wall of ice, the years of training, the human persona, it all incinerated in a single, primal, possessive flash. My mate, an arrow, black-fletched and silver-tipped, was in the air, aimed at his back. No! It was not a human sound. It was a roar, a deep, guttural wolf's roar that tore from my throat, a sound I had not made in 5 agonizing years. I didn't push him. I hit him. I threw myself at him with all the preternatural, explosive strength of my true form. I was not a fragile human. I was a wolf. I tackled him, my shoulder connecting with his chest like a battering ram. We crashed to the ground, a tangle of limbs, my body shielding his, just as the arrow slammed into the stone wall, where his heart had been a millisecond before. It struck with such force that the stone splintered, the silver tip burying itself 3 inches deep. I was on top of him. The world was a blur of adrenaline and the phantom thwack of the arrow. And the scent. My God, the scent. The impact, the primal protective shift in my instincts, had been too much. The scent blockers, already overwhelmed, failed. My true scent, the one I had hidden for 5 years, the scent of winter roses and a coming storm, exploded into the room. It was not a whisper. It was a tidal wave. I was lying on top of my mate, my true, undisguised scent enveloping him, choking him. He was staring up at me. His stormy eyes were wide, blown with shock, not from the arrow, but from me. He was frozen, his hands on my waist. He inhaled. It was a ragged, desperate, agonizing breath. A gasp. The breath of a drowning man finding air. His pupils dilated, swallowing the gray, until his eyes were 2 black pits of impossible, dawning recognition. He knew that scent. It was the scent from his dreams. The scent that had haunted him. The scent he had been chasing. Trying to catch on his human assistant for weeks. The scent of his mate. He stared up into the face of Evelyn Thorne, the cold, sterile human, and he breathed in the soul of Lyra. You, he whispered. The word was not a question. It was a sound of profound, absolute, shattering horror. It's you. Chapter 9. Time stopped. We were a frozen tableau of the impossible. The Alpha King on his back, staring up in shattered horror, and his ghost, his fated mate, straddling him. Her scent a suffocating, intoxicating storm of winter roses. You, he breathed again. The word was a broken thing, a death rattle. His hands, which had been on my waist in a gesture of simple, human shock, changed. His fingers became claws, digging into the fabric of my suit, into the flesh beneath. It wasn't a caress. It wasn't an embrace. It was an act of possession. He was anchoring himself to the impossible, branding me as real. The bond, the one I had starved, drugged, and chemically burned for 5 years, roared to life like a starved beast finally uncaged. It wasn't a hum. It wasn't a song. It was a scream of agony, of reunion, of pure, unadulterated need. It flooded every cell in my body. A deluge of him. His shock, his betrayal, his bottomless aching pain, and under it all a dark, terrifying, possessive joy. I couldn't breathe. I was drowning in him. My own horror was a mirror of his. The wall was gone. The lie was dead. My primal self, the wolf, had taken over to save him, and in doing so, had just handed me, bound and gagged, to the one man who had the power to destroy me completely. I scrambled to get off him, my hands pushing against his chest, but it was like pushing against a mountain. "Let me go," I gasped, my voice a strangled, unfamiliar thing. It was Lyra's voice. "Let you—" His voice was a low, dangerous growl. He didn't release me. He used my own momentum to roll us, a single, fluid, violent motion. In a second I was on my back, my head hitting the stone floor, and he was on top of me, pinning me with his entire body. His hands caged my head, his forearms pressed against my shoulders. We were chest to chest, pelvis to pelvis. The torn open front of my blouse was a mockery, my skin bared to his. He was staring down at me, his face inches from mine. His stormy eyes were no longer hollow. They were a raging, chaotic tempest of 1,000 emotions, all of them fighting for dominance. Betrayal, disbelief, fury, and a raw, agonizing longing that eclipsed everything else. He lowered his head, his nose hovering over the patch he had exposed on my shoulder. "What is this?" he snarled, the words vibrating against my skin. "Get off me," I panted, struggling, but it was useless. He was an Alpha King and I was his mate. My body, the traitor, did not want to fight him. It wanted to yield. "What is it?" He roared, his scent of petrichor and steel becoming sharp, ozone-like, the smell of his rage. "It's a lie!" I screamed back, the truth finally tearing from my throat, raw and bloody. "It's a wall! It's a cage! It's 5 years of hiding from you!" His face contorted. The pain that shot from him, through the bond, was so intense it made me cry out. It was the pain of a man who just realized the ghost he'd been grieving was alive and had been standing next to him, torturing him every single day. "Lyra," he breathed. My name, from his lips. It was a prayer and a curse. You were here, all this time." "You rejected me," I spat, tears of rage and terror streaming down my face. "You cast me out. You called me a liability. You told me to disappear. So I did." He choked. The council. "The council wanted an alliance," I shrieked, my own fury, 5 years of suppressed, agonizing rage, finally exploding. "And you agreed. You chose them. You chose a treaty over your mate. What was I supposed to do? Die an outcast? No, I hid. I erased myself. I became a ghost so I could at least survive." "The whack!" Another sound from the window. The assassin was still there, reloading. Jackson's head snapped toward the sound. The hunter, the king, the strategist, slammed back into place, overriding the shattered man. In one move, he was off me, hauling me to my feet as if I weighed nothing. He didn't let go. His hand was a manacle on my arm. He dragged me behind the massive, carved stone of his desk. "You are not human," he stated, his voice a low, lethal thing. He was processing. The tactical mind was clicking, piecing together the last few weeks. The ambush, the data, the strategy. That wasn't an assistant. That was a warrior. "I am what you made me," I panted, my back against the desk, my entire body humming like a live wire from his touch. From the bond. "Who was that?" he demanded, his gaze on the window. "Who tried to kill me?" "I don't know." "Another lie." He spun on me, his face a mask of fury. "You knew before I did." "You heard it." I felt it," I countered. "The same way I feel you right now. The same way I've always felt you, you arrogant blind fool. The bond, it screamed. It's always been screaming." His eyes widened. The full, crushing weight of the truth finally landed on him. I had felt it. I had been feeling it for 5 years. Every woman he touched, every night he spent in a drunken haze. I had felt it. His rage, which had been hot, turned to a cold, sick horror. The horror of what he had done. Not to a memory, but to me. "Lyra," he whispered, his voice cracking, and he reached for me, his hand trembling, not with rage, but with a desperate, broken plea. I flinched away from him. Don't touch me." His hand froze. The rejection, my rejection, hit him like a physical blow. I felt it through the bond, a sharp, icy spike of pain. And in that moment, in that shared, agonizing silence, we both knew. We both understood. The chasm between us wasn't just his rejection. It was my lie. It was 5 years of shared, self-inflicted torture. Knock, knock, knock. A polite, firm rapping at the heavy oak doors. Jackson and I looked at each other. The assassin was outside the window. And now, someone was at the door. "Alpha?" It was Marcus's voice, tight with urgency. "Alpha. Lord Valerius's party has been sighted. They are an hour early. The trap was sprung. The wedding, the slaughter was now." Jackson closed his eyes for a single, agonizing second. He processed it all, the assassin, the lie, the coup, the arriving bride. He opened his eyes. They were the eyes of the Alpha King, cold, hard, utterly resolved. He looked at me, at the torn ruins of my human disguise, at the raw weeping patch on my shoulder, at the woman who was his mate, his tormentor, his ghost, and his savior. "You have a choice," he said, his voice void of all emotion but command. "You can stay here and let the assassin finish the job. You can run and let Magnus and Malachor slaughter me and take my pack." He stepped toward me, his hand fast and sure, ripping the remains of the scent blocker patch from my skin. I cried out as the adhesive tore away, leaving my scent, my true scent, to blaze in the room, raw and unfiltered. He inhaled, a long, deep, shuddering breath, his eyes closed in a momentary agonizing ecstasy. "Or," he whispered, his voice a raw growl, "you can be what you are. My mate, my shield." He didn't wait for an answer. He spun, striding to a tall, carved wardrobe against the far wall. He ripped it open. Inside were not just his cloaks, but rows of servants' livery. He grabbed a simple dark gray wool cloak and threw it at me. "Cover yourself," he commanded. "Not as Evelyn. As you. Your scent. Let them smell it. Let them know the pack has a queen." He turned back, his own eyes burning with a new, terrifying fire. The Hollow King was gone. The hunter who had been stalking a ghost was gone. In his place stood a predator who had just found his mate. "Marcus!" he roared, striding to the door and pulling it open. "They are early? Excellent. It seems the gods are on our side after all." Marcus stared, his gaze flickering from his energized alpha, to the splintered arrow in the wall, to me, my torn blouse, my unbound scent, my face streaked with tears. His jaw went slack. "Alpha? What?" "The ghost is real, Marcus," Jaxon said, his voice a low, rumbling, joyful growl. It was the most terrifying sound I had ever heard. "And she is furious." He looked back at me, his gaze a brand. "Tonight, we were supposed to have a wedding. Instead," he smiled, his teeth flashing, "we will have a reckoning. Are you with me, Lyra?" Chapter 10. My world had been reduced to the space of a single, ragged breath. Jackson's question hung in the air, a declaration of war disguised as an invitation. "Are you with me, Lyra?" He wasn't asking. He was telling. Marcus, his hand still on the door, was a statue of pure shock. His gaze, wide and disbelieving, flickered from the arrow embedded in the wall to the torn, ruined scraps of my human persona, to the unmistakable, blazing scent of a high-born wolf, a scent he hadn't smelled in 5 years, radiating from a woman he knew as a human servant. "Alpha," he stammered, his mind finally connecting the impossible dots. "Miss Thorne is my lady Lyra." Jaxon didn't even look at him. His burning gaze was locked on me, a brand, a claim. "She is my mate," he said, his voice a low, possessive rumble that vibrated through the floor. "She is the true queen of this pack. That is all you or anyone else needs to know. Now close that door." Marcus, his face pale with the implications, slammed the door shut. The trap was set. The 3 of us were now in a war room. I hadn't answered Jackson's question. I didn't need to. My wolf, that traitorous primal bitch, had already answered for me. She was pacing the confines of my mind, not in terror, but in a state of ecstatic, furious anticipation. She was at her mate's side. There was a threat. She was needed. After 5 years of being drugged into silence, she was finally awake, and she was furious. I clutched the heavy wool cloak he had thrown at me, pulling it around the ruins of my blouse. The fabric was rough against my skin, but it was his. It smelled of him, of petrichor and steel, and the bond, now raw and unshielded, drank it in, sending a wave of agonizing, unwanted comfort through me. "You're walking into a slaughter," I said, my voice hoarse. It was Lyra's voice, rough from disuse. Jaxon's terrible, joyful smile faded, replaced by the cold focus of the Alpha King. Magnus thinks so. No, I think so, I snapped, taking a step forward. The strategist, the ghost trained by human masters, took over. Evelyn's cold logic fused with Lyra's primal rage. The assassin at the window wasn't a shifter. He was human. I felt him. No scent, just cold. He used a high-velocity crossbow with a silver beryllium tip. That's military grade. That's not Malicor's usual pack of rogues. That's a professional. Jaxon and Marcus exchanged a look. I had just confirmed their worst fears. He'll be in the hall, I continued, my mind racing. And he won't be alone. Malicor is using Magnus to get his wolves inside, but he's using humans to do the real work. Your men, I looked at Marcus, will be looking for shifters, for rival scents. Malicor's human assassins will walk right past them. They'll be dressed as servants, just like your loyalists. You'll be killing each other while the real threat cuts your throat. Jackson's eyes narrowed. The assistant he had admired was gone, replaced by a strategist who saw the board more clearly than he did. What do you propose, Queen? He whispered, the name a test, a taunt, and a weapon. I would not let him see me break. I met his gaze, my own just as cold. You are not the only one who can set a trap. Your plan is to have your loyalists pose as servants. That plan is good. He raised an eyebrow, a flicker of his old arrogance. I know. It's not good enough, I cut him off. Your men are wolves. They'll be on edge. They'll stink of adrenaline and aggression. Malicor's human assassins are professionals. They'll feel nothing. They will smell your trap before they even spring it. And Magnus's traitors, they'll be looking for it too. Then what? Marcus asked, his voice tight. You change the game, I said, my voice dropping. You don't hunt the wolves. You hunt the humans. And you... Jaxon. You hunt the traitors. My gaze met Jackson's. You will walk into that hall with me on your arm. Not Evelyn. Me. Lyra. Your long-lost true mate. My scent is blazing. The entire pack will feel it. They will know me. They will remember me. The entire dynamic will shift. A slow, predatory smile spread across Jackson's face. He understood. He saw the beautiful, brutal genius of it. Magnus is announcing my betrothal to another. He breathed, his voice rich with dark amusement. And I will walk in with my fated queen at my side. He will be thrown off, I said. His allies will be thrown off. They've come for a wedding, an execution. They are not prepared for a resurrection. They will be confused, and in that confusion, we strike. How? Marcus asked. Your loyalists will still be servants, I commanded, my mind working, the pieces clicking into place. But their orders change. They are not to draw a blade until I give the signal. They are to serve. They are to watch. Their only targets are the other servants, the ones who look too calm, the ones who linger too close to Jaxon, the ones who do not smell. And you? Jaxon asked, his voice a low purr. He was enjoying this, the madness of it, the danger. I am a ghost, I said, my teeth clenched. I have lived as a human for 5 years. I know how they move. I know how they think. I will find them. I will be the only one hunting the human assassins. No, Jaxon said, his voice flat. The amusement was gone, replaced by a cold, hard negative. You will not leave my side. I am not asking your permission, I snarled, my wolf rising, enraged by his command. It is not a request, he roared back, his alpha power slamming into me, a physical wave designed to force my submission. It hurt. The bond amplified it, a shockwave of command that made my knees want to buckle. But 5 years of poison and pain had given me a spine of ice. I held his gaze. I did not bow. You need me, I whispered, my voice a blade. You need a scalpel, not a hammer. I will be at your side until the music starts. Then you will let me hunt, or we will both die." We stared at each other, two fated mates, a king and a ghost, locked in a battle of wills that was more intimate than any touch. The air between us crackled, the bond a live wire screaming with rage and a dark, twisted desire. Boom! The sound of the great horns echoed from the battlements, a deep, resonant blast that signaled the arrival of the Blackstone delegation. They were here. Jaxon broke the stare. He turned to Marcus. "You have your orders." My men watch the servants. "Lyra hunts. You guard the doors. When the trap is sprung, no one leaves that hall alive. Understood?" Marcus's eyes were wide. He was looking at me, at the ghost who was giving his alpha commands. But he was a loyal beta. He bowed. "Alpha, my lady." He turned and was gone, vanishing through a private servant's door. We were alone again. The horns sounded closer this time. "It's time," Jaxon said. He didn't move toward the door. He moved toward me. "I am not your puppet," I whispered, my heart hammering as he approached. "No," he said, stopping inches from me. He was so close, his scent was all I could breathe. I could feel the heat radiating from his body. "You are not. You are my queen." He reached out, his hand strong and calloused, cupping my jaw. His thumb brushed over the tear track on my cheek. I flinched, but I did not pull away. "I hurt you," he whispered, his voice raw, the sound ripped from his soul. Lyra. What I did." "Stop," I said, my voice cracking. "Do not. Not now. Do not humanize this. Not when we are about to go to war. Be the king. I will be the shield." His eyes searched mine, a stormy sea of 5 years of unspent pain, rage, and a longing so deep it terrified me. He saw no softness in me. He saw only the ice. "So be it," he growled. His head dipped. I thought he was going to kiss me. My body tensed, my wolf rising in a desperate, hopeful lunge. But he didn't. His lips brushed my ear, his hot breath sending a shiver down my spine. "But know this, Lyra. When this is over, when our enemies are ash, there will be a reckoning. For you, and for me. This is not over." He pulled back. His hand slid from my face, his fingers grazing my neck, and he took my arm, his grip a possessive, unbreakable manacle of flesh and steel. "Lord Valerius and his daughter have come for a wedding," he whispered, his eyes glinting with a terrifying, primal light. He began to pull me toward the door, toward the great hall. "They will get one." Chapter 11. The great hall was a sea of noise, light, and tension. Torches blazed from sconces, casting flickering, dramatic shadows over the 200 wolves packed shoulder to shoulder. The air was thick with the scent of roasted meat, spiced wine, and the sharp, anxious musk of a pack on edge. At the far end, on the raised dais, sat Elder Magnus, his face a mask of smug piety. Beside him were 2 empty thrones, one for the king and one for his new bride. And at the center of the hall, standing beside a nervous-looking Lord Valerius, was Lady Alara. She was beautiful, in a cold, statuesque way, with hair like spun silver and eyes the color of a winter sky. She was a political prize, and she knew it. Her gaze was fixed on the great doors, waiting for her king to appear. The horns, which had been a distant signal, now blasted a final deafening fanfare from the entryway just behind us. "Ready, my queen?" Jaxon's voice was a low growl in my ear, his breath hot against my skin. His grip on my arm was a possessive brand. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My heart was a war drum, my senses screaming. The bond, raw and open, was a 2-way conduit. I felt his anticipation, his cold, lethal rage, and a dark, terrifying layer of pure, possessive joy. He was not afraid. He was ecstatic. He was walking into a war, and he had his mate at his side. The grand oak doors swung open, and we walked in. Silence. It did not fall. It crashed. The noise of 200 conversations, of music, of clinking glasses, died as if a god had snuffed it out. Every single head, warrior, servant, traitor, and guest, snapped toward the entrance. They had been expecting their king, sullen and defeated, to be dragged to his political wedding.
They were not prepared for this.
They saw their alpha king, yes, but he was not the hollow king. He was a predator. He was erect, his shoulders back, his power rolling off him in palpable, suffocating waves. He was not wearing ceremonial robes. He was dressed for battle, in black leather and steel. And on his arm, clutched to his side as if she were a part of his own body, was me. A woman in a torn blouse and a simple cloak, her face streaked with tears, her eyes blazing with a cold, strategic fury. But it was not what they saw that broke them. It was what they smelled. My scent, my true, unfiltered, fated scent, hit them like a physical blow. The scent of winter roses and a coming storm. The scent of their pax Luna. A collective shuddering gasp swept the hall. It was the sound of 200 wolves inhaling at once, their primal instincts recognizing a truth their eyes could not comprehend. "Lyra," a voice whispered from the crowd. An old warrior, one who had known my father. And then, like a tidal wave, the bond slammed into the pack. The fated connection between an alpha and his Luna is not just a private thing. It is the anchor of the pack. For 5 years, that anchor had been fractured, bleeding a low-grade poison of despair into their hearts. Now, in a single, explosive instant, it was whole. I felt it. They all felt it. A wave of power, of rightness, of pure, unadulterated pack flooded the hall. It was a jolt that made wolves stumble, that made warriors drop their glasses. Jaxon thrived on it. I felt his power surge, the bond feeding his strength, his rage, his certainty. At the dais, Elder Magnus's face, which had been a mask of triumph, had turned a mottled, chalky white. His eyes, fixed on me, were wide with a horror that eclipsed all reason. His plan, his perfect, intricate plan, had just been incinerated by a ghost. Lord Valerius, the Blackstone Alpha, looked utterly lost. His daughter Alara looked furious. This was not her script. "Jaxon!" Magnus's voice was a reedy, cracking thing that barely carried. What is this? Mockery." Jaxon didn't answer him. He didn't look at him. His gaze was fixed forward as he pulled me through the parted, stunned crowd. He was not walking. He was stalking. We moved past his pack members, who stared at me with a mixture of awe, terror, and dawning, furious joy. They were remembering. They were understanding. The lie they had been fed for 5 years was crumbling before their eyes. We reached the foot of the dais. Jaxon stopped. He looked up, not at Magnus, but at the 2 empty thrones. "You are in my seat, Elder," he said, his voice a calm, lethal purr that carried to every corner of the silent hall. Magnus rose, his hands trembling. "Alpha King, you forget yourself. We are here to welcome our allies, to celebrate your betrothal." "A betrothal?" Jaxon interrupted, his voice booming. "A betrothal you arranged, Magnus? A betrothal to save this pack from a threat you manufactured?" The color drained from Magnus's face. I don't know what you mean." "You will," Jaxon said. He turned to the crowd. "My pack! My warriors! You have been told we are weak, that we are bleeding, that we need an alliance to survive." He raised our joined hands, his grip on my arm a vice. "You were lied to." A A roar of confusion and anger began to build. "You were told your fated Luna, my mate, abandoned you," he bellowed, his gaze sweeping the room. "Another lie!" He turned, his stormy eyes fixing on Magnus. The threat to this pack has never been from the outside. It has always been from within. Magnus, his face a mask of pure, murderous hatred, knew the game was up. He had lost. He screamed, a high-pitched, furious sound. "Traitors! He is mad! Seize him! Seize them both!" It was the signal, and the hall exploded into chaos. But it was not the chaos Magnus had planned. The wolves loyal to him, the Umbra Fang, drew their blades. But they were confused. They were staring at me, their Luna, their instincts screaming at them not to attack. Lord Valerius and his guards drew their swords. "This is an insult, Jaxon. You will pay for this." And among the servants, the true threat began to move. I saw it all. My mind, honed by 5 years of human observation, was a supercomputer. To my left, a servant, who had been calmly holding a tray of wine, dropped the tray. His eyes were not on the battling wolves. They were on Jaxon. His hand went inside his tunic. To my right, high up in the musician's gallery, the man from the window. The human assassin. He was not playing a lute. He was assembling a small, deadly crossbow. Behind me, another barmaid, her face a mask of cold, scentless calm, drew a long silver stiletto from her sleeve and began to move toward Jackson's undefended back. Magnus's plan was still in play. The real assassins were in motion. But they had not counted on me. Jaxon, his fangs and claws extended, roared and leapt at Lord Valerius, a blur of primal fury. "Marcus!" Now. Marcus's loyalists, the true servants, drew their own hidden blades and slammed into the traitors. The hall became a symphony of screaming, clashing steel and tearing flesh. The human assassin to my left raised his hand, a small black Targ-style dart gun aimed at Jackson's neck. He never fired. I didn't think. I acted. I ripped my arm from Jackson's grasp. The heavy wool cloak fell from my shoulders, revealing the torn, ruined blouse, the warrior beneath. I grabbed a meat-carving knife from the ruined feast table, my hand a blur. I didn't throw it. I ran. I crossed the 10 feet between us in 2 bounds, my wolf's speed a shocking explosive force. The assassin's eyes widened, his human calm shattering as he saw a ghost moving at impossible speed. I didn't stab him. I ran the blade up under his ribs and into his heart, silencing him before he could even make a sound. I let his body fall, pulling my blade free, and spun. In the gallery, the crossbow was aimed. Not at Jaxon, at me. I had just revealed myself as the true threat. We stared at each other across the chaos. The professional human killer. And the ghost. He fired. The bolt was a black streak, silver-tipped and whistling. I didn't dodge. I didn't have to. A massive, dark shape slammed into me, tackling me to the ground, a shield of pure, unadulterated rage. It was Jaxon. The bolt hissed over our heads, shattering the stone of the throne behind us. He had seen it. In the middle of his own battle with Valerius, he had been watching me. He had felt my intention, my target, through the bond. We were on the floor, tangled together, his body shielding mine. He was snarling, his fangs bared, his eyes a solid, burning gold. The barmaid assassin, the one who had been behind him, was now on top of us, her silver stiletto plunging down, aimed at Jackson's exposed back. "No!" I screamed. I couldn't move. Jaxon was too heavy. The blade never landed. A new player joined the game, a silver-haired whirlwind. Lady Alara, the spurned bride, grabbed the assassin's wrist, her own face a mask of cold fury. "No human," she snarled, "kills an Alpha King at my wedding." She broke the woman's wrist with a sickening snap and rammed the stiletto into her chest. Jaxon Lyra and the intended bride Ilara were a heap on the floor, surrounded by a bloody, raging war. Jaxon stared at Ilara, stunned. Ilara stared back, her eyes cold. He insulted me, but he is a king. You, she looked at me, her gaze raking over my torn clothes, my bloodied knife, are his mate. This is your fight. She rose, drawing her own blade. Black Stone, she roared. We are betrayed. Lord Valerius is a traitor. Fight with your true alpha. Fight with me. Jaxon and I rose from the floor, his hand finding mine, our fingers lacing, bloody and sure. He looked at Magnus, who was fighting Marcus, his face a mask of pure, demonic hatred. This ends, Jaxon growled, his voice a promise. Yes, I breathed. My wolf and I finally won. It does. We did not walk. We ran side by side, a king and his queen, two halves of a whole, to reclaim their pack, and to finish the war that had separated them 5 years ago. Chapter 12. We moved as one. The great hall was a blur of chaos, the clang of steel and the roar of wolves echoing off the stone. But for me and Jaxon, the chaos simplified. There was only the enemy. His hand was locked in mine, a point of burning, possessive contact. We were a whirlwind of coordinated death, a hammer and a scalpel. I didn't need to look at him to know where he would be. I felt him. A traitor from the Umbra Fang lunged at Jaxon's side. Before Jaxon could even turn, I had already released his hand, snatching a dropped sword and driving it through the wolf's throat. Jaxon, in turn, spun, his fist, claws extended, crashing into a Blackstone warrior who was charging me. He didn't just block. He ended him, his power a terrifying final thing. Our eyes met over the carnage. His were burning gold, and I knew mine were doing the same. The bond was a river of fire between us, a torrent of shared adrenaline, fury, and a terrifying primal belonging. Gallery! Jaxon's voice wasn't spoken. It was a command that seared directly into my mind through the bond. He knew I was the only one fast enough. He and Marcus were carving a path toward the dais, toward Magnus, who was fighting like a cornered demon. Lady Ilara and her loyal Blackstone wolves were holding Lord Valerius, her own father, at bay, a battle of silver-haired fury. I broke from Jaxon's side, a ghost in a blood-soaked, torn blouse. I didn't run through the battle. I ran over it. I used the overturned tables as stepping stones, my wolf's agility a shocking grace. I vaulted onto the stone railing of the grand staircase, my balance perfect, my senses screaming. The assassin in the gallery had reloaded. He saw me coming. He was fast, a professional. He aimed, fired. I threw myself off the railing, tucking into a roll, the silver bolt thudding into the stone where my chest had been a second before. I landed on the stairs, my momentum carrying me up. A low, running shadow. He was fumbling for another bolt. He was too slow. I hit the gallery railing, vaulted over it, and landed on him. We crashed to the wooden floor, my carving knife turned weapon raised. He didn't plead. He didn't beg. He just stared up at me, his eyes cold and scentless. The ghost, he whispered in a human tongue. He said you were... He lied. I snarled and plunged the blade into his heart. I didn't pause. I spun, looking down at the battle below. It was turning. Our loyalists, energized by the presence of their returned Luna, were fighting with a fervor the traitors could not match. Jaxon and Marcus had reached the dais. Magnus! Jaxon roared, his voice cutting through the din. The elder, his face purple with rage, turned from his battle with Marcus, his ceremonial robes splattered with blood. He saw Jaxon, and he saw me in the gallery above him watching. He knew he was surrounded. You... abomination! He shrieked, his eyes fixed on me. You should have died. You tried, Jaxon growled, stalking toward him. You engineered this entire war. You poisoned my pack. You tried to force my hand." "Force your hand?" Magnus laughed, a high, broken sound. "You fool. You weak, sentimental boy. You think this was about power. This was about purity." His wild eyes swung to me. Her mother was a half-breed. Her blood is tainted. She was a stain on your fated line, and you were too weak to see it. Jaxon froze. The blood drained from his face. "What? What did you say?" "I gave you the choice, boy," Magnus screamed, his voice cracking. "The Council's treaty was a lie, a smokescreen. I was the one who forced your hand. I was the one who told you to cast her out. I told you if you did not reject her, I would have her assassinated. I would have her hunted down like the animal she is and put a silver bolt through her heart." I felt it. The memory, the truth. It wasn't a political choice, it was a threat. I felt Jaxon's past, 5 years old, explode into the present through the bond. His memory became mine. I saw him, a new young king facing Magnus in this very hall. I heard the elder's quiet, venomous threat. I felt Jaxon's unbearable choice. Reject his mate, break his own soul, and send her into the wilderness, hoping she would survive. Or keep her, and watch her be murdered by his own council. He chose to save my life. He chose to break me, to break himself, to save me. You. Jaxon's voice was a whisper, a sound more terrifying than any roar. He looked at Magnus, and the rage was gone, replaced by a cold, empty void of pure, absolute death. "You took her from me." "I saved this pack," Magnus shrieked, raising his sword. He never finished the sentence. Jaxon did not shift. He did not need to. He moved faster than I had ever seen a wolf move. He was a black-clad shadow, and his hand, not his claws, shot out and seized Magnus by the throat, lifting the elder clean off his feet. Crack. The sound of his neck breaking was the only sound in the hall. The battles had stopped. Everyone, loyalist, traitor, Blackstone, was watching. Jaxon held Magnus's body aloft for a second, a broken trophy, and then let it fall to the stones with a wet, final thud. Silence. Utter. Complete. Lord Valerius, seeing Magnus fall, threw down his sword. Lady Alara, his daughter, kicked it away, her face a mask of cold satisfaction. The war was over. Jaxon stood on the dais, his chest heaving. His golden alpha eyes scanned the room, landing on every traitor, every cowering wolf. And then, his gaze found mine, still in the gallery. The gold faded, leaving the stormy, broken gray. The king was gone. The man, my mate, was all that was left. He didn't speak, he just looked at me, and I felt him. I felt the agony of his choice, the 5 years of self-loathing, the lie he'd been forced to live. The hollow king. He had been hollow because he had carved out his own soul to save me. I did not run down the stairs. I walked. The entire pack watched, silent as I descended. My bare feet were soundless on the stone, my bloodied knife still in my hand. I walked through the parted crowd, past wolves who now bowed their heads, their new Luna, their returned ghost. I reached the dais and walked up the steps, never breaking his gaze. I stopped in front of him. We were inches apart, covered in the blood of our enemies, the bond a raw, weeping, screaming thing between us. "You lied," I whispered. "I did," he whispered back, his voice breaking. Lyra, he would have killed you. I chose the only way I could. I chose to let you live, even if you hated me. You let me believe you were a monster," I said, my own tears hot and stinging, finally falling. "You let me believe you chose power over me. For 5 years. I am a monster," he choked, his own tears tracking through the grime on his face. I chose to hurt you. I chose to lie. I couldn't tell you the truth, I was a coward. I was afraid. Afraid you'd come back. And he would see you, and he would finish it. He sank to his knees. The Alpha King, in front of his entire pack, knelt before me. He didn't just bow his head. He submitted. He bared his throat, an act of ultimate, final trust. "My life is yours, Lyra," he whispered, his voice raw with 5 years of unshed grief. "You are my mate. You are my queen, and I am yours, to judge, to forgive, or to end. It is your choice." The hall held its breath. I looked down at the man who had shattered my life to save it, at the man who had lived in a private hell, drowning himself in liquor and strangers, all to keep a secret that would have gotten me killed. I had spent 5 years honing my ice, my rage, my hate, and in a single second it all melted. I dropped the knife. It clattered on the stone. I did not strike him. I did not bite him. My trembling hands rose and I cupped his face, my thumbs wiping away his tears. He shuddered, his eyes closing. A sound, a raw, broken sob ripping from his chest as he leaned into my touch. "We lied," I whispered, my own voice thick. "We both lied. We both hid. We both chose to be ghosts." I pulled him up. He rose, his hands finding my waist, his grip desperate as if he was afraid I would dissolve. "No more," I said. "No more," he vowed. He looked at me, his stormy eyes a universe of pain, hope, and raw, savage need. He was asking, not with words, with his soul. I gave him my answer. I tilted my head, baring my own throat to him. An offering, an acceptance, a pardon. He let out a sound of pure, agonized relief, and his head dipped. He didn't just bite me. He worshipped me, his lips tracing the column of my throat before his fangs, hot and sharp, finally sank into my skin. It was not pain. It was fire. It was ecstasy. It was the bond, broken and bleeding, finally being sealed. A white-hot jolt of him, of us, of pack, slammed through me, and I cried out, my fingers digging into his shoulders. He raised his head, his mouth stained with my blood, his eyes glowing gold. My king. I rose on my toes, and in front of our pack, our family, I claimed him back, my own fangs sinking into the curve of his neck, marking him as mine. He roared, a sound of triumph, of possession, of finally being whole. He lifted me from the ground, his arms locking around me, and his mouth crashed down on mine, a kiss that was not a kiss, but a reckoning. It was 5 years of pain, and rage, and lies, and solitude, all burned away in a single, all-consuming, fated truth. The great hall, surrounded by the dead and the victorious, erupted. The roar of our pack, was a wave of sound, a promise of a new, unbroken, and stronger dawn. We had our reckoning, and we had survived.